This Week in HPC by Intersect 360 Research. Actionable insights for today's advanced computing world.
The United States fires science.
And a quantum breakthrough for RIKEN and IBM.
It's This Week in HPC. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of This Week in HPC with Intersect 360 Research, distributed in partnership with HPC Wire. I'm Addison Snell, and that's Kevin Jackson. And if you're catching us on our YouTube channel, you can actually see us for This Week in HPC because Kevin and I are together in Chicago, Illinois. We thought we'd bring you a video version of the podcast, see how the magic is made. If you're catching us on your normal RSS feed, then you've got the audio and you can enjoy that as well. But Kevin, we had some big news to get into. Now, as I said, we're in Chicago. Let's start with that. We're getting a couple of good meetings in, including it was fun to get hosted yesterday by Charlie Catlett at Argonne National Labs, get to see the Aurora system. That was fun.
Oh, absolutely. I'm always excited to see major computers, especially perhaps one of the largest, on the current top 500 lists. And Aurora is just an exciting machine. It was really cool
El
to see.
Capitan, number one?
El Capitan is number one, but Aurora is near the top.
Near the top, right. So, but it's up there, right?
Yes.
Also, we've had some other client meetings. There was other national lab news. Kathy Yellick got named the director at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. Really big congratulations to Kathy. We're huge fans. And we saw that Gina Taurasi from Oak Ridge National Labs this week is in Washington at the AI Plus conference talking about things like she's on the board of our Halo America's advisory committee, but she's there talking about Genesis mission, AI for science. There's a lot good going on with the national labs right now.
There is. There's a lot good going on, but there's also, some major changes coming from the top down that we saw as well.
U.S. administration just a couple weeks ago, Trump fired the National Science Board. 22 board members who were in charge of the National Science Foundation found out all at once that they weren't needed and their jobs had been eliminated, Kevin.
Yeah, via email, as maybe a little bit more common than these days as it should be. But it's an interesting moment for science in the U.S. right now. Most specifically, it was 22 members that were let go. This is by many seen as the Trump administration's part of the Trump administration's desire to cut back on NSF funding. Right now, that number is about $9 billion. They're trying to cut it back. I believe it was 3.9 billion, so about in half. What we also know is that the National Science Board, they were in the process of discussing a report on the state of U.S. science at the time. Of course, we don't know how connected that was to the firings, but it's certainly shaking up the U.S. science world.
It certainly reads politically like it was connected, that we didn't want the NSF putting out a report on here's the state of science in the United States. You're right that the Trump administration had previously tried to cut funding to NSF, but Congress eventually reinstated it under the advocacy of this National Science Board. The theory being now that without a board in the way to do that, maybe this time they're a little more successful in cutting the funding there. And it just goes directly to what we had already predicted from this administration. Reading from the forecast that we published last year, we wrote, the current U.S. administration recognizes the power of AI and is driven by ideals of American exceptionalism. The trend of national sovereignty and technology independence in AI will only rise throughout the forecast period. The same cannot be said of the U.S. administration's view on the value of scientific research. There have been dramatic reductions in nationally funded research, including grants in academic research institutions. Turning the money faucet off is relatively easy, but turning it back on requires a lot of time working with the plumbing. One fundamental tenet of HPC forecasting has been the notion that HPC is a stable market because there will always be more science to explore. This remains true at an academic or philosophical level, but we're now forced to acknowledge that while scientific discovery cannot be kept down indefinitely, it can be repressed for years or even decades at a time. So, Kevin, that's what we wrote last year. against this backdrop, it seems like we're getting that right because we're dealing with an administration that is at once pro-technology and also anti-science in a nutshell.
Yeah, that line right there sums up exactly what we've predicted earlier. And you can't truly have technology without science. These innovations are not born in a vacuum. They're often born out of decades of background research done by scientists who perhaps don't produce something that is initially marketable or initially valuable. The internet being perhaps the best example. The U.S. helped administer this as a defense communication network, and no one could have ever imagined the billions and billions of dollars that would be eventually invested in this. So it's certainly a little disheartening to see, and it also connects to what we've seen earlier. We had the NCAR axing recently that has been quite distressful. There are legal actions being taken against that, but this is certainly a trend within the administration.
Right. That's the National Center for Atmospheric Research, which has also been under fire from the Trump administration. And it sort of leaves us looking at where do we go with AI for science. Now, the European Euro HPC or for example, Japanese AI for science, major national initiatives in AI are really entrenched in science. Genesis mission, in theory, also is with the American Science Cloud and AI for science. But it seems that we're somewhat at odds there. And AI, as great as it is, you can also fall for a little bit of a parlor trick where you fall for the idea that AI can just do the science without the scientist. And I don't think we're there, that's not true. If you're going to do AI for science, you have to do science.
Yeah, and you said, I don't think we're there. I don't think we want to be there. I don't want to take a human out of the loop of these sorts of things. And it's just a very illogical move in my opinion. And I'm not so sure this is the correct move for the U.S. going forward.
Well, and the HPC, the high-performance computing industry, has been vocal in its criticism of the Trump administration's taking out the National Science Board. HPC Wire has covered that thoroughly in terms of bringing in quotes from luminaries from across the industry who do have a certain amount of political influence. Now, we were talking about the national labs and Genesis mission. Another thing we're really looking forward to is Trillion Parameter Consortium. TPC 26 is coming up in a couple of weeks in Baltimore. It'll be interesting to see whether or not this gets discussed in that context. Are we just talking about the technology, or are we also talking about the national funding that goes along with that from a scientific perspective?
We certainly should be. And, there's also just been this very hectic proposal stage around Genesis. I mean, we've talked with many people who are scrambling to get their proposals in. This administration likes to move fast. And perhaps that is not the best way to be handling a $9 billion a year National Science Board.
Well, move fast and break things was always a Silicon Valley tenet, and it goes along with the zeitgeist of a lot of AI moguls or people like Elon Musk and SpaceX, and we still have this idea of experimentation and racing forward, and failure is part of that. But when we say break things, dismantling an entire science board that was about to do a report on the state of science in this country, we've also posited that on this vector, the United States gives away any lead that it has in science by the end of this decade, and that largely goes to China, where it's been through most of recorded human history.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad to see there's a pushback against it. I hope we continue to see that. I don't think this is a good move for us, to be quite honest, the U.S.
The technology is great. I'm sad for the science. But speaking of the science, there are advancements that link science and technology. I think the best example of that in the news this week in HPC is a story coming out of RIKEN, the center in Japan, together with IBM, and a big breakthrough with quantum computing.
Yeah, absolutely. We were just discussing the importance of how science pushes technology. Quantum science for a very long time has been at best theoretical, or at best very within the laboratory. And we are now finally starting to see some very practical applications. One of those being RIKEN's and IBM's recent work with a quantum-centric supercomputing workflow, which simulated 12,635 atom protein, trypsin, which is the largest protein system to have yet be modeled using quantum hardware. It's an enormous achievement. It's actually 40x the size increase over their previous work, and 200x higher accuracy. This is a really huge step forward for quantum.
And we've been looking for exactly this. Give us the real application. Start to show us not just the science project, but what you can do with it. Now, there's a long way to go, but we've been amping up our quantum computing research, looking at market sizing, looking at market trends. It was one of the modules in our State of the Market report going out. And what we're finding is that the HPC and AI community, they are looking forward to quantum computing, and less for the acceleration or scale of current applications, but more in terms of looking into wholly new avenues of research, things that we couldn't do with conventional computing, that quantum computing has the potential to bring into the fold. And this kind of protein modeling is exactly that type of application.
It truly is. Yeah, it seems to be that the way that the industry is currently viewing quantum is to kind of fill in those gaps. There are certain jobs that HPCs just simply cannot do. Quantum is going to fill in those gaps, but it's not going to replace HPC. That's something that we've, again and again see. A lot of our clients view quantum as a accelerator. It's going to move HPC forward, not simply be its own thing. But it's still in its early stages now. Depending on who you ask, I think there are people in the industry who believe their own marketing and have thought that quantum has been a little bit more useful than it has been. But we are starting to see a massive trend towards quantum being something that scientists and businesses actually want to use. That having been said, current satisfaction is a little lower than perhaps we might like. We had a satisfaction gap analysis on this.
Part of every State of the Market report that we've put out, we look at what we call satisfaction gaps, where we are asking how important are all of these features, how satisfied are you in all these features. And for most of the technology areas we've looked at, they provide really strong guidance in terms of, all right, this is the area vendors should invest in if they're going to bring next generation improvement to HPC and AI users. With quantum, the interesting thing that came out was there were wide satisfaction gaps across the board for everything. It was the highest around application software, but if you start saying, that's the number one, that's all we need to do. No, there's work to do across the board in error correction and programming and everything else associated with quantum computing. So people are excited about it, but it's still out on the horizon in terms of wide-scale deployment.
It really is. And, error correction is one that I'm seeing that we're getting done a lot better, a lot faster than we have in the past. But there is a lot of space to grow. There is a lot of space to get done. And I've been following quantum for quite a few years now, and I'm actually quite excited to see these things have true applications in business.
Since we're talking about RIKEN, we should mention that that's another one of the international sites, together with Barcelona Supercomputer Center, that's really a big part of Trillion Parameter Consortium, and we'll probably be hearing more from them at TPC 26 as well. But this advancement of here's a real application, here's a protein, we're modeling it with quantum computing. I do think as much as we're saying quantum computing is out there, this is planting a flag and is a big step forward.
It is. I mean, healthcare and drug discovery are some of the largest business applications, certainly some of the most important in terms of, human quality of life. And if we can apply quantum's accelerator process to this incredibly valuable area of expertise, sky's the limit.
Well, Kevin, it's always a pleasure to do these roundups with you. It was even more of a pleasure to do it in person from Chicago. Thanks for tuning in. You've been listening to This Week in HPC.
You've been listening to This Week in HPC from Intersect 360 Research. Got a question? Comment? Email thisweekinhpc at intersect360.com. Intersect 360 Research. Actionable insights for today's advanced computing world.